Of course, Russia is a capitalist society which is hit by the global capitalist crisis very much like other capitalist societies. But at the same time, there are specific conditions which make Russia's situation in some ways a bit different and in some ways a bit extreme. And there are two sets of these specific conditions. One specific condition of Russia is that it is one of the post-Soviet states. In fact, not the only one, because people tend to forget that there are also states like Ukraine, like Kazakhstan, like Georgia, like even like Estonia, which is now technically a member of the European Union. But if you go to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, you'll see a hell lot of difference compared to, say, Western Europe, even compared to the places like Poland and the Czech Republic, but especially, of course, compared to say, Sweden or Finland, which are neighboring countries. So you have the whole series of specific social and economic and infrastructural aspects which have to be taken into consideration in understanding the specificity of that kind of post-Soviet capitalism. And on the other hand, the other set of specific conditions is produced by the kind of global division of labor within which Russia has a role of a country providing raw materials and first and foremost energy resources to Western markets, most specifically to Western Europe. And in that sense, there is nothing unique about that kind of integration of a country into the global capitalist economy, but it is important that you have a semi-colonial type of integration combined with a semi-imperial type of political formation, because it's not only a very big country, it is still an important country and a mighty country with the ruling elite which has certain ambitions going far beyond traditional colonial elites or quasi-colonial elites. And it's not only just that it is, and it always used to be an independent country, but also it has its own imperial ambitions, and given the size of the economy, and given the importance of Russian exports, even though these are raw materials, that creates also economic ambitions for the newly emerging Russian bourgeoisie. Again, if we do not spend too much time on just discussing the previous development, the pre-crisis development, we still have to mention a few important changes. And of course, if we speak about the 1990s, that was a period of destruction of the old Soviet economic system and mass privatizations, which were completely illegal, even within the framework which was created by the post-Soviet Russian state itself. And that was the kind of permanent illegality, permanent irrespect of the law, which was nevertheless not only tolerated by the state, but in many ways encouraged by the state. And those who protested were actually repressed and punished by the state. So in that sense, the state itself perpetuated this state of illegality, the state of kind of plunder within its own country. But that came into a very serious contradiction with the needs of capitalist development at the later stage. Because yes, capitalist development does need a certain respect of the law, the rule of law, which is part of their property arrangements, which is part of their business deals and so on. So if you build up the new capitalist elite, which is based on plunder and irrespect towards laws, irrespect towards rules and so on, you end up facing a problem with the next stage of development. And at that stage, you have to discipline your own bourgeoisie, your own private business, your own elites. And of course, these problems existed in the West as well, and in every country during the so-called phase or period of primitive accumulation. Like if you look at this country, in Britain, if you look at the people who made the fortune of British capitalism in the, say, late 16th century, early 17th century, these people were not necessarily very respectable from the point of view of liberal capitalism, and just like Sir Francis Drake and others did not respect the property of the others so much, right? Or Henry, well, just Admiral Morgan and other nice champions of early British capitalism. But nevertheless, it took a whole period of time and a whole series of political and social transformations for these changes to happen, while Russian capitalism had to move very, very fast from this period of plunder to the stage of kind of discipline and the rule of law, or at least some kind of order, because even if you do not achieve the rule of law as it is supposed by the liberal theory. By the way, I have doubts about this kind of rule of law being achieved anywhere exactly the same way as it is described in the books. But anyhow, just if you fail to come any close to this kind of liberal ideal, still you need certain rules and certain regulations to be obeyed at the daily level. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work out. So, and that was exactly the meaning of the shift from the Yeltsin period to Putin period. So the meaning of Putin was very much about disciplining the ruling elite. And in that sense, actually, Putin was actually welcomed by some people in the opposition, and even some people on the left, because technically he was very much in conflict with certain elements of the new capitalist elite as they emerged out of the 1990s. Well, he had to put Khodorkovsky in jail. He had to kick out Berezovsky and Gusinsky. So 3 of 7 most powerful oligarchs in Russia were punished. And that created a lot of confusion. Because on the one hand, liberals, the people who were excited about the perspectives of building a capitalist economy in Russia, they suddenly became very angry that a Russian state was going after some of the biggest capitalists in Russia. So they said, well, this is about Russian state getting back into the Soviet period, just, well, undermining the achievements of the 1990s, undermining the property regime and so on. And that actually pushed quite a lot of liberals into opposition, because every attack on capitalists they treated and they understood, interpreted as an attack on capitalism, which is not exactly the same thing, as we know. On the other hand, on the left also some people were confused and saying, okay, there was a conflict between the state and some of the big capitalist oligarchs, so supposedly it means that the state is kind of moving to the left, becoming progressive. In fact, nothing like that happened. And by the way, the lack of shift to the left is very visible in terms of Russian state not doing anything in terms of making its social policies more progressive, in terms of taxation, for example. On the contrary, for example, under Putin, we consolidated the system of taxation which was based on flat income tax. So if you take top income tax, private individuals' income tax in Britain, I think it's about 40% at the top level, if I know correctly, which is considered to be rather low, according to the previous standards of the Keynesian period. In Russia, it's 13%, and it's flat. So it's I pay 13%, and Mr. Abramovich who pays the same 13%, right? So no, there are no difference. Equality, you see. So in that sense, Putin's regime, in terms of social regulations, in terms of the way market structures and business structures were organized, not only made no moves, shifts to the left, but on the contrary continued the traditional neoliberal policies. But it was accompanied, as I told you, with individual conflicts between the state and individual capitalists, which actually had a purpose of consolidating, stabilizing, and developing Russian capitalism as a system not dependent on the character, and individual characteristics of individual capitalists, but becoming more like a system of capitalist relations rather than just a specific arrangement between individuals who dominated the society and the state. So disciplining individual capitalists was part of developing capitalism rather than the opposite. However, that produced a very interesting phenomenon, which was typical for most of Putin's period and is still typical for today's Russia, which we can characterize as the emergence of new liberal opposition to the regime. Then another aspect of the post-Yeltsin period of the 2000s was that because of these attacks on individual oligarchs, Russian business became depersonalized and became more corporate. So instead of just having oligarchs and their private businesses big enough as to control certain parts of the country, but still remaining private business of individual oligarchs, Russian capitalism developed the system of corporate rule. So big corporations with huge bureaucracies, which with the depersonalized decision-making process, well, very much along the lines of general tendencies within the capitalist system. So in that sense, Putin did succeed in modernizing Russian capitalism quite a lot in a very short period of time, but also the results are very limited. On the one hand, the speed of change was tremendous. In that sense, modernization, transformation, kind of consolidation of Russian capitalism developed itself at an enormous speed. And from that point of view, you can see Putin as a tremendous success. But on the other hand, exactly because of the speed, all these processes remain incomplete, unfinished, partial. Well, there are whole segments which remain undone, sort of, or unconsolidated, because the speed is so fast that you have no time to work on the minor detail to consolidate the rear and so on. So, and in that sense, ironically, the very speed of transformation makes this transformation very vulnerable. So that did not create a big problem for the system as long as the system was growing. And once the oil prices, which were the key element for the economic success of Putin's period, were growing, everything was under control, everything was fine, and they were able to continue the way they did. In fact, Putin's politics was based on the idea of satisfying everybody. So on the one hand, you have to satisfy the newly emerging capitalist elite, and not only specific factions, but the whole of it. And that means that earlier in the 1990s, there were different segments of the new elite which fought each other over resources, over influence, over specific opportunities here or there, privatization deals. So the idea of Putin was to consolidate the elite, to consolidate the new corporate bourgeoisie and corporate elite. And that means that every single ambition of every single group must be taken positively by the state, and the state must do everything to make it satisfied. And as long as you have additional resources, that's okay. So that means that, ironically, you have to spend money just on consolidating the elites, because you cannot and should not make choices. you support this specific company at the expense of another company. You support their ambitions, for example. You support their vision of developing something. So, as long as you have a lot of extra money coming from the oil resources, you can do it. But on the other hand, you also have to stabilize the society, so that the society basically sees what's going on as a progress, not only in capitalist terms, but in its own terms, in terms of how people see their own lives. And that was also a success in a way, because basically they recovered the loss of living standards in Russia, at least at the average level. So the loss of living standards in the 1990s was really tremendous, really catastrophic. I think it's one of the worst disasters in the peacetime, maybe the worst, at least as long as we know, because we can't compare with the whole history of the humanity, but the history of the current generations, definitely it's the worst disaster. But basically, they did recover the average wage of the late Soviet period by about 2006, 2007, more or less. We came to the living standards of the Brezhnev period, which well, doesn't sound like a tremendous achievement, but for many people it was, because given the level of poverty in provincial Russian cities, that was quite a considerable change. And that also gave people some feeling of progress, some feeling of positive change, that okay, well, things are still very hard. And by the way, I'm speaking about the average. So quite a lot of people, I mean, maybe the majority of people are now below the Brezhnevite level of spending and living standards. So it's only the average which is more or less achieved. But still, I mean, things were improving. They're getting better. They were getting better. And that means that you have the both wolves and sheep more or less happy with the situation, you know. So that provided a situation of social and political stability for about a decade already. However, as long as the crisis was coming, that created a problem of inadequate resources, because that kind of approach was based on enormous resource waste. So to satisfy everybody, not making choices, means you spend extra. So that was the cost of stability. Another aspect of this situation, as I told you, was tremendous inefficiency of many decisions, because again, they were based not on the logic of market efficiency, or if we are looking from the capitalist perspective, not on the logic of social efficiency, whatever it is, if we are looking at that from the point of labor of the toiling people and so on, like what do we get from it, right? But it was based on the idea on the logic of compromise, which does not fit any of these efficiency logics, whether it's capitalist or working class. And for example, if we are looking at the social relations, of course I can now quote the research done by Anna Ochkin, a very good sociologist who also works with us at our institute, ICSO, who studied social arrangements, social policy in Putin's period, and discovered a very interesting phenomenon, that it was very much the post-Soviet social arrangement which was gradually decomposing, but at the same time preserved. So they did not dare to destroy the system of social guarantees or social benefits or social support, which inherited from the Soviet period, because they were afraid of some kind of explosion. And not even an explosion in political terms, not even they were so much afraid of people just, I don't know, going to the streets and so on. But, well, okay, there are lots of ways in which toiling people can protest against bad conditions. Like they stop dying, for example. And that is another way of reacting. We had the average, no, it's serious. People are not protesting, they're not fighting back, they just die, period. Like we have the average male life expectancy collapsing from 70-something, 74 I guess, to 58. I mean, it's a matter, it's another way of protesting. You just say, forget it, I go away, goodbye, stay without me. You know, it's a very passive way of protesting, not very efficient. But anyhow, what I'm saying, that in different ways, all these policies produce problems. Because when you have a population which is dying out massively, it's also a problem for you. Probably it's less of a problem compared to the population which is revolting. But still, you have to deal with the question. And there are all sorts of other things. People dropping out, drinking, I don't know, crime rates going up, and so on. So in all these cases, you have to do something about it. And what they did, they undermined Soviet social support system. And then they saw that the consequences were terrible. Then they stopped some of the neoliberal reforms, or they kind of, and the outcome was very paradoxical, because on the one hand, they failed to achieve what we can call some kind of liberal or capitalist market efficiency. So the market was not completely dominant in specific fields like housing, like education, like healthcare, like in the pension system. However, the old logic of the Soviet system was also undermined, because the market made its inroads there. So it ends up in a tremendous contradiction. So the system was not good from either point of view, and to make it going, you have to spend more and more money. And they tried to kind of come to terms with it in about 2005, when they launched their two reforms. First, they tried to abolish their benefits, monetize the benefits. Like specific sections of population had specific benefits, like they were entitled to ride buses for free, or well, they had specific subsidies of some other kind, and these subsidies were not paid in cash, which was quite reasonable, because at least that was the way to minimize inflation, to guarantee that the money, and that was very little money in fact, was really going to solving that or this particular problem, because if you spend this money just giving it away to people, the outcome would be that first inflation would increase, and second, the money will not probably go into the right place, so they will not be properly allocated. So anyhow, that produced immediate protest, because suddenly, all of a sudden, people discovered that when the money was given to them in terms of cash, the money was not enough to buy exactly the same service, or the quantity and quality of services as it was provided by the state system before. So that was an uprising in January 2005. So they pulled back. The same thing with housing reform. The same thing with the healthcare reform. Both were launched simultaneously in 2005. Finally, the educational reform, they didn't pull back completely. They kept moving on, but the outcome was total chaos. So don't speak to any education professionals in education in Russia today about the results of current educational year, because now everybody says it's just something terrible is happening. The new system just simply doesn't work. So everybody's unhappy. Teachers are unhappy, students are unhappy. I mean, even bureaucrats are not very happy with what they've done, because nothing works. You know, the press is full of reports of some idiocies happening everywhere, which is exactly the realization of the kind of reform which is going on. And all that is accumulated year after year after year. So the crisis, when it came, immediately exposed all these contradictions within the logic of self-reproduction of Russian capitalism. And at this stage, different corporations are not anymore so much happy with each other, because they now have to start fighting for the limited quantity of resources. The population suddenly discovered that their living standards are not improving anymore, and actually are getting worse, and they're losing their improvement. Although, as I told you, things developed very fast. But so there was an improvement within like last 5 years, and then within the last year, it seems that we have to wait for the end of the year, of course, with the statistics, and of course, statistics will not probably be exactly adequate and exactly accurate, but still they will reveal the tendency. My suspicion is that both in terms of industrial growth and in terms of welfare, we lost within 1 year, I think, most of the achievements of the whole Putin era, if not everything. If we did not go even below that level. So all the inefficiencies within the social system, the system of social protection, they became exposed almost immediately. And for example, Russian government, given the wasteful kind of system, has to spend a lot of money on just keeping the system going. When the crisis began, initially, the attitude of Russian elite, both business elite and the governmental bureaucratic elite, was very kind of arrogant. The press was full of statements given by economists, politicians, business people saying, well, Russia will not suffer from global crisis. Russia will not be affected by global crisis. They will need our oil anyhow. They will pay for our oil anyhow. More, some economists said, in fact, we are going to gain from the crisis. We are going to be the country which is going to get a higher status in the world system. And at that stage, the Russian elites were incredibly ambitious. And they were as ambitious as to start criticizing the United States, not only on the United States policies towards Russia, but also in a more global way. And they did not even wait for, say, Germany or France to come out with criticism, as they did in 2003, when they did criticize George W. Bush, but only waiting for the French and for the Germans to make the first step, and then they joined the chorus, they joined the coalition. In 2008, just a year ago, when we were here at the previous Communist University, as you should probably remember, there was this famous Georgian war. Famous, I don't know, but anyhow, this the short war between Georgia and Russia, which was a kind of turning, it seemed to be like a turning point in relations between Russia and the West, in the sense that for the first time Russian elites started to speak almost like anti-globalization activists, and they invited Hugo Chavez also, or they were flirting with Hugo Chavez with some kind of Latin American progressive politicians, speaking about sending arms to Latin America to counterpose U.S. influence there and so on. Well, some speeches really did sound a bit progressive. At least they've learned the words. I mean, it's not very hard. You just listen to the radio, just get a couple of books, and they even ordered, I have to admit, one of Russian ministries ordered to research papers at our institute to learn more about anti-globalization movements and everything. So they learned, and I came, and it was kind of funny because what I saw, they were just a minister. Actually, this guy was he's still a minister. He was just with his block note. He was just making notes and just putting down the names of famous anti-globalization intellectuals to be quoted in his speeches. So something very, very, very nice. But that was all over within months, of course. And then the whole thing collapsed because the oil prices went down. And then with the oil prices, the whole system started falling apart, which produced some kind of panic. But then this kind of first collapse, first wave of crisis was followed by a sort of temporary stabilization. Again, there is nothing specific this time about it because it's happening all over the world. All major governments spent about $6 trillion on stabilizing the crisis instead of actually addressing the reasons for the crisis to happen. They are trying to fight against the symptoms. That's what they're doing. In my opinion, they're actually making the crisis worse because they're kind of pressing it deeper. If you have more time, I can go back to that, but it's a bit of a different discussion. But anyhow, at least the symptoms, they did manage to stabilize. Among other things, it is reflected in the oil prices going up. In fact, the oil prices going up means that the conditions of industry are getting worse in the situation of general recession. It's bad news. But from the point of view of Russian elite, it's good news. So that created this situation of stabilization, but the cost of stabilization was incredible. And if we're looking at it from monetary point of view, Russian government used to have $6 billion of currency reserves by the beginning of the crisis period. Well, before stabilization,
what currency?
US dollars, 600 billion. By January, they spent half of it. So we start from August. They spent $300 billion, or 200, no, not three, 200 something billion within like 4 months, basically. So that's like $100 billion in 2 months. That was, and more than that. And then they stabilized, and now it's a bit above that. So because of the oil prices going up, they started increasing that a little bit, but now they're about 400. But if and when the next wave of crisis comes, you can calculate very easily when we are going to be out of money. And they also achieved to do that only because they devalued the currency. Again, I should not tell you about that because they exactly followed what the British government did. So they exactly followed the same pattern. They devalued the currency, and once they've got more rubles for the same amount of dollars, they managed to spend their currency reserves less rapidly, and you have more rubles to pay their domestic obligations for the same teachers, public sector workers, doctors, bureaucrats, and so on. So that slowed down the process, but again, there are limits. But the major problem was that they failed completely to stop industrial decline. Even though the ruble is stable, the currency reserves are stable, the financial system is more or less stable, industry goes down at a tremendous speed. So every month we have less industrial production than before, and some symbolic industries are now closing down. The most important event is what happened to automobile production. Automobile production was rapidly growing in the period of economic growth because that was the industry of success. Okay, living standards were improving, the middle class was increasing in numbers and its purchasing power, so they started buying cars. And all foreign manufacturers moved in producing these cars. By the way, that was also very important for the working class because that resulted in our best industrial union being established exactly in this industry. It's MPRA, Union of Auto Workers, which is the most militant, the most organized, the most popular free trade union, which was established as a youth movement, and which succeeded in a few strikes and became, especially for the left, it became a kind of symbol of our success story. That's our success story, where the working class has a muscle to achieve something, right? So now this industry is collapsing. And AvtoVAZ, which is the old Soviet giant of automobile production, of course they used to produce terrible cars. I don't remember, some people here, people of my age are old, they have, at least they have seen some of these Ladas in Britain, which disappeared completely from Britain. You see, the problem is that now they're disappearing from Russia. That's much more of a problem. And by the way, they've got enormous money from the state, which was just stolen. Because it's a private company, they've got state support, the money goes nowhere. Again, I'm not sure that this story is so unique.
Right.
You can give me a few equivalents in the West, okay? But anyhow, then the speed of that was also quite pathetic. And because people laughed, actually. People started laughing at what they did with this money. And still they managed to improve some of their production. But at the very moment when they started producing something which can be with some degree of hesitation called modern cars, at that very moment the whole thing collapsed and the main assembly line was stopped on August 1st. And here we're coming to the final part of the presentation, which is about the labor movement and the left. What are we going to do about it? So, speaking about the labor movement, I think the situation is not bad, though of course all of us know that economic crisis is no good time for organized labor in its trade union form. Usually it's bad time for the unions. And given the fact that Russian free trade unions are very young and rather small, and most of their social base is in a limited number of industries, so they're not all over the place, they're just kind of ghettoized in specific industries. That makes the situation pretty difficult. And the response of the labor leaders is pretty standard and in many ways is correct, but incompetent. What I mean is that basically they move towards politicization. That's also a standard thing. In the situation of recession, when the traditional methods of fighting for workers' rights through trade union organization are becoming limited, trade union leaders are becoming more interested in politics. Well, that's the history of the Labour Party and a few other parties. So that's reasonable, that's in a way correct. But they don't know how to do it. They don't know whether there should be an organizational form for that, and which organizational form. And there is no political movement with which they can form an alliance. And they have debates about whether they have to form a political movement themselves on the model of the Labour Party, or they shouldn't do that. In that sense, they're extremely confused. So they ended up just making political demands without having political tools to have these demands achieved. And well, these demands usually are quite sane and correct in themselves. Like they're calling for nationalizations, for example. So far, there are no nationalizations. There were riots in a factory called in a factory town of Pikalova, where people called for the nationalization of their factories, which was stopped by the owners, and the owners stopped paying wages earlier than they stopped the factory. Like what Yeltsin discussed yesterday about Iran, the same thing, wage arrears. People kept going to their companies, to their factories, kept working, not getting their wages. And then one day they just came there and discovered that the managers just closed the gates, saying, okay, no work. Saying, okay, no work, where's the money? The money expired earlier than the job, right? And but that was only part of the problem, because then their then the town where all three factories closed down went broke. And the first thing the town government did, the town administration did, was in a very proper liberal way, they decided to cut hot water supplies to the population to save money because the town was broke. So then the crowds of people rushed into the town hall, stormed it, took it over, and so what? So the town hall was in their hands, so what are you going to do with it? Just a stupid empty hall. And then they rushed to the road nearby a few days later and blocked it, asking for Putin to come and settle the issue and probably nationalize the companies. Finally, Putin arrived because, well, one thing is just stupid empty building of the administration. Another thing is just one of the major roads in northern Russia was blocked by people. So he came there. He forced the owner, Mr. Deripaska, to pay the wage areas from his own pocket, which he didn't have to do because it's a limited liability company, and proclaimed victory. So it did not lead anybody anywhere, but crises like that, explosions like that are happening every second week nowadays. After Piccolo, it became kind of questionable. It became reproduced here and there. These actions of protest and these situations. By the way, don't forget, many of these industries were built in the Soviet times, and they were built as part of the general complex of Soviet industry. So once privatized, they also became very, very inefficient because the system started decomposing. And yes, there is a social movement, there are demands, but these demands don't have political tool to be realized, and very often these demands are kind of aggressively loyalist. Like people are asking the government to do something for them. They're not protesting against the government and against the system. They're asking the system to provide, to deliver what was offered or what was considered to be legal and necessary according to the official proclamation, official announcements of the system, of the politicians themselves. So that's about the social movements and about their unions, and finally about the left. The left is growing, but the problem is that it's growing from a very low starting point. I can go probably into more detail later during the debate because I'm getting out of time. But it is very important to say that the left is growing in terms of attracting intellectual kind of interest. So there are more students, there are young intellectuals who are becoming radicalized, who join in. Well, it's now becoming kind of trendy to talk left if you come to a university audience, right? There are more activists. Almost every single group reports some kind of growth. Some people joining in and becoming activists. But so far, that does not transform itself into any kind of political organization or political project. So in that sense, there is a certain success story, but again, it's a very limited one. However, as I am always optimistic about the future of the left and of my own country, I think we still have time for the crisis to develop, because not only things are going to get worse before they get better, but it's also very important that political consequences of the crisis do not come immediately. In no country they come immediately. If we're looking at the Great Depression, the actual crisis started, as we know, in 1929, but the visible political consequences and mass social movements became really important around 1931, if we take the United States and elsewhere in the capitalist world. And the political consequences continued well into the Second World War for another decade. The political logic, which was released, which was unleashed by the crisis, continued well into the mid-30s and then into the Second World War. So in that sense, we still have time for politics. The point is that we have to start working and thinking and acting politically, not just in terms of intellectual commentators, being intellectual commentators of what is going on, but becoming actors. And for that, you need political thinking, political approach, and political organizations, which, of course, have to be built up. And that's part of what we are doing as an institute. We're trying to bring together people and create conditions for a political organization in Russia. Thank you. Well, I'm not against Trotsky's tradition, for example, because it was very important in understanding the nature of the Soviet Union and the whole thing. I'm against sectarianism. That's quite a difference, you know. By the way, speaking about, because Chris, I did not answer your question. I just totally discovered it. But no, we can come to that back through Tina's question, because speaking about the nature of the USSR, yes, the debate goes on. The debate goes on, and at the same time, the debate is kind of dying out in a way, because it turns into recycling the very same positions which were already formulated mostly in the Western left and in the post-Trotsky period of the Western left. And not providing us with new answers and new insights, especially because although we have now some archives, some materials on the Soviet experience, they do not sort of get directly connected to the debate of on the nature of the Soviet Union. Like, okay, you have specific studies which are very good on specific aspects of the Soviet experience, and then you have all these general theories, and then people who belong to any of these currents, they just pick up these empirical or not so empirical studies of specific segments of the Soviet experience, and then they reinterpret them from that point of view. Say, okay, now we have the proof that that was a degenerated worker state. No. This is the proof that it was the state capitalist state. And so you basically pick up the same material and put it into different theoretical frameworks. So honestly, I rather abstain from these debates for a period of time already, because I find it a little bit frustrating. Not because these debates are not necessary or not good, but they are not leading us to new conclusions and to new positions which can synthesize or overcome the old divisions. So to develop a new understanding of the Soviet experience, which will lead us to go above all these specific positions of the, say, 1950s or 1960s, right? However, I think there is a historic logic to it, because in a way, I think the process which was launched by the Russian Revolution in 1917 is not yet ended. And that is one of the reasons why we're still kind of weak on theorizing the consequences, because we don't see the full set of consequences. It was like theorizing the meaning of English Revolution not out of 1688, but out of the situation of, say, 1672, when the whole issue of the meaning of the revolution was yet unresolved, even within this very limited framework, right? Or like theorizing the meaning of French Revolution in, say, 1835, because some Russian young historians, they complain that Putin's regime is a kind of Orleanist regime, you know, just with now we've got the old Soviet, for example, the anthem being with a new set of words, you know, just like having a tricolor banner in France after 1830 by the king at the same time on the tricolor. So Putin is a kind of Russian Orleanist approach. You know? Just you're not in a good position to make final historic judgments yet. So. But why Tina actually moved me back to Chris's question. Speaking about realistic, of course, I don't mean pragmatic. I don't mean, well, hopefully you understand, I didn't mean being opportunistic, just like we discussed it in the morning. What I meant is that a correct political statement makes no sense unless it leads to specific political action, or at least it opens an opportunity for a correct political action which could lead to the progress of struggle, to some kind of strategic perspective. In that sense, I agree very much with what John said, I think yesterday, speaking about different wars and saying we cannot, for example, speak about the First World War the same way as the Second World War, and the war in Afghanistan the same way as we spoke about the Second World War, and so on. So there are specific specific conditions which have to be taken seriously, and in that sense, of course, there is a certain set of principles. But how they should be applied to the specific event, this is exactly the debate. It's not like saying Lenin in 1905 said that, that's why now we have to call for this and this. And that's how they behaved. And I said, no, but in 1914 he said something else. So, and that's why now we have to, period, okay? And then the second thing, okay, forget it. Let's think that all these positions, or any of one of these positions is right, whatever. What are you going to do? Are you going to go to the to join the troops and do some propaganda among the troops? Are you going to fly to Tbilisi and I don't know, to explain, to find some Georgian leftists to deal with and to organize some kind of joint action? Not even a discussion about what can be practically do as a consequence of taking this or that position. Once the position is taken, the job is done. The rest absolutely has no meaning. And in that sense, when I'm speaking about realistic debate, you cannot disconnect your positions from your actions. And that's exactly the meaning of politics. That means that all these positions are apolitical, ironically, because they're not connected to practical action, and they're not leading to any practical action. And in that sense, even when you are very small and very weak, you can take positions which can lead to specific, very minimal, very limited, but practical actions, which can have impact, make impact, which may have consequences, even very limited ones, but real. But that was not the case in this story. So, well, speaking about the power of the US and the challenges, yeah, there were symbolic challenges. By the way, if you turn on Russian television, not Russia Today, which is trying to be like Western television, but if you take Channel 1 or Channel 2 of Russian television, you can think that there is a Cold War again. There is a lot of anti-American propaganda on air every day. Then if you listen to that with more attention, you suddenly discover that, yes, it seems like a Cold War, but you don't understand what the Cold War is about. Because the Cold War in the 1960s was about different social systems. It was not just about who's the strongest in the world, but it also had an aspect of social difference and ideological difference. I mean, you can say whatever you think about the Soviet Union. We don't have to say the Soviet Union was socialist. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that it was different. And it has its own ideological, specific setup. And it's not anything like that. So it's basically like we're against Americans. Why? Because we want to be exactly like Americans ourselves. And they prevent us from doing that. Okay, and it's like Americans are very hypocritical. They have dual standards. That's why we have the right to have dual standards on our side as well. Yeah. No, I'm not kidding. That's what you hear. People say that openly. And so it's neither a moral stance, nor a political, nor an ideological confrontation. It's just an ambition to be a big power, and mainly it's a feeling of being offended. Americans do not recognize us, they do not respect us as a major power. We deserve being treated more seriously, more positively, with more respect, period. We are an imperialist country. We want to be an imperialist country. That kind of stuff. You know? So. And there is very little the left can make out of it, because it's not the kind of anti-Americanism which is very much encouraging our kind of approach. And that, by the way, becomes a problem very often, because we do make anti-American statements, and the government does make anti-American statements, and they say, well, you're saying basically the same as they say. Well, we mean something else. Yeah? So, but real ambitions are diminishing. And now I think you see the difference also, because now Medvedev keeps saying that, well, there is solidarity needed among all major powers to fight against the crisis and so on. So there is that confrontation, more call for solidarity, but at the same time there is an attempt to push the West in terms of, okay, well, we have to be respected. Well, you need our solidarity, we need your help, but let's treat each other as equals, really. We just don't treat us as kind of secondary powers. But the whole BRIC thing is, I think it's nonsense. And it's an invention of Western journalists. There was nothing behind it. There was no such a bloc, and there was no cohesion between these countries. They represent very different types of economies and societies, and I mean, this is just a stupid invention of some American journalists. However, of course, some stupid Russian bureaucrats believe it. Probably Chinese didn't. Chinese never believed in that nonsense, but Russians did. And that's why they organized the first BRIC assembly, BRIC kind of summit in Ekaterinburg, which achieved exactly nothing, because there was no point. Finally, speaking about education, housing, it takes quite a lot of time to discuss it, but basically, Russian housing remains heavily subsidized, and it's privatized, but it's heavily dependent on still socialized structures of the municipality. So you have private flats, but the houses are not private. That's the irony. It's a bit of legal absurdity. Flats it's a block of flats. Every single yeah. No, but that's in Britain, but you still have lots and lots of individual houses, right? So the infrastructure is very different. In Russia, it's exactly this kind of
central heating is who supplies the central heating?
The municipality.
Municipality.
Yeah, municipality. They're trying to privatize.
You can't live without.
Exactly, but they're trying to privatize. They fail, and all sorts of things. So they more or less succeeded in privatizing telephone lines. With water and heating, which is very important in Russia, so far nothing works. They try their best, but it doesn't work. Well, and they're kind of piling contradictions, because they always have partial successes. Well, these partial successes lead to more problems. Finally, speaking about conspiracy, actually it worked, but up to an extent, because we did have to make an announcement. And the announcement was that on the internet we published a statement about the forum and the telephone of the press secretary for the press. If you want to get there, you call the press secretary, he'll bring you there. The first phone call he got was from a guy who openly said that he was from the Special Department of Combating Extremism in the Ministry of the Interior, of the police. Asking, where are you going to have your seminar? How many people are going to be there? And fortunately enough, Ilya Stupnikov, who was the press secretary, just said, oh, I have some problems on my phone, I just don't really hear you. And turned the phone off. That's why we failed to get much of the press. Well, first of all, speaking about statements, again, I have to repeat myself. It's not saying that one doesn't have to make statements or formulate positions. It's just like saying that positions make sense when they're connected to political practice. And in that sense, what you said is exactly right. And we did discuss Georgian war, for example, at the Institute, and we have a different, we just didn't discuss it from this kind of abstract perspective. What should Georgian working class do, according to us? We discussed what we have to do according to our own perspective, and also, by the way, we were attacked for kind of not making statements like that, just like, I don't know, let's overthrow both governments, blah, blah, blah. And just speaking about also the responsibility of the Georgian government for what happened and all these things. And of course, some people even accuse us of being pro-Kremlin because we said some negative things about Saakashvili, not just blaming our own government, but saying, look, who started the invasion into South Ossetia. Well, that was an analytical thing. However, at least, well, we now have a website, Rapkor, and Rapkor has I don't know, 2,000-3,000 hits per day, 2,000-3,000 visitors per day. It's not bad for and in that sense, when we publish something on Rapkor website, it has more visits than all other leftist websites around Russia taken together. So even in that sense, it makes sense that we publish an analytical article. It makes sense to publish an analytical article, because at least it is some kind of propaganda, though it's very limited, but it goes somewhere. But it's not just about formulating a crazy statement and go home happily to sleep. Second, coming back to the Ukrainians, so I didn't expect it to be such a hot issue here in this very room. But actually, I think, well, first of all, Stuart, in a way you're right, because quite a lot of Ukrainian leftists, they pass through Vernik's group at one or another stage of their lives, and of course then they ran away. And but yeah, he did train a lot of people who are good leftists today, and of course they remember Vernik as a nightmare, but that was one stage of their life. So you were not the only one who was charmed by this nice guy. And on the other hand, in a way, Mark, he has taken your advice, because then he discovered the ways to attract Ukrainian funds very much using his international experience. So in that sense, he exactly followed your advice. With his own interpretation of it, of course. Finally, speaking about foreign investments and about Russian companies, how they deal with public money. Foreign investments into Russia, in terms of financial investments, in terms of portfolio investments, not in terms of direct productive investments, but in terms of portfolio investments, they became very effective because Russian companies were extremely undervalued. You see, the capitalization of Russian companies was dramatically undervalued during the privatization process to facilitate rapid privatization. So usually they were sold at the price of, say, 1 to 1.5% of their real price, even given the price of commodities which were produced by these companies. Because they said, well, we don't know, we don't have a stock market, so that's why we cannot say what's the value of a company. So let's establish the absolute minimum. But the point is that the value of the commodities was available, because there was a global market. You can know what's the price of these commodities, and you can judge on the value of the company on the basis of the value of these commodities produced, right? So in that sense, even from that point of view, it was 1.5% usually, which was the price charged for the company. No doubt that these companies started growing once they went public. In that sense, it was a very attractive portfolio investment for foreign capitalists, and that's why they all registered here in London to attract additional capital. But I think now it's almost over, because the returns are low. Because then the Russian stock market collapsed, and in that sense, of course, it's not a very attractive place anymore. Maybe it will restart growing, but this is a different story. And finally, speaking about the money which was stolen or misused and so on, you see, as long as there is no public control or public money going to private interests, the kind of minimum minimorum of social democratic approach to public funding, it's absolutely natural that this money will keep disappearing. And that's absolutely within the logic of neoliberalism, because they keep saying the market is preventing corruption. But the problem is that once you have this sovereignty of proprietors, of private owners, over anything which is within the company, so as long as you prohibit public control over the funds, that means that corruption is disappearing because it is legalized. There is no corruption, not in terms of practices being different, but just these practices are not called corruption anymore. They're legal, period. And in that sense, I think one of the most minimalistic demands which should be developed and used now, especially with the trade unions, is there must be total public control over every penny, every kopeck, every cent of public money given to any private interest. I mean, this is even not reformist. This is minimalist, reasonable. This is just about common sense. But even this is not really achieved so far. I think this is something to campaign in terms of propaganda, in terms of transitional program, whatever, but in terms of making the kind of first step which we absolutely have to make. This is the issue in Russia, in Britain, in the United States, everywhere. Okay, thank you.